So today we want to talk about stealing fire, how Silicon Valley, the Navy SEALs, and Maverick scientists are revolutionizing the way that we live and work. Now, if I were to sum this up in one line, you can say two researchers survey the different ways that people are altering their consciousness to improve performance. As you may see right now, and this is just a disclaimer, I don't have a book in my hands, so I have not technically read this book. I listened to it as an audiobook. You may be asking, how can that be the same? Well, obviously, listening to audiobooks takes practice. You have to be an attentive listener. You also have to not get bored with audiobooks. And one thing I do to keep my attention and to keep busy at the same rate as audio is, I speed up the audio. So if I read at a faster rate than I hear, then I just amp up the speed, and then I'm able to basically listen at the same speed that I would read. So if you're using the Audible player or you have VLC or something like that, you can actually adjust the speed to something that will keep you engaged. The two authors of this book, Kotler and Wheal, they've co-founded something called the Flow Genome Project, which studies how people get into the zone, and i.e. they try to max out peak performance. They try to create a mindset of peak performance. Who's this book for? It's for people who are curious. Who is it not for? It's not for you if you're looking for a do-it-yourself manual about peak performance. It's very jargon heavy. It's light on detail. It's heavy on anecdote. There's a lot of cool stories about how people have done it in the past and how people are bringing this into the future. The premise is simple. People have always sought to make themselves better, going beyond being just happy and thrusting themselves into ecstasy of some sort. Whether it's athletes, artists, drug users, meditators, religious figures, each has tried to modify their state to attain something greater than themselves. These states are not sustainable or controllable for the most part. After they start talking about this state, they bring up an idiom that for many of us we probably don't even realize the meaning of, beyond the pale. And the pale was the boundary that was set in, early English towns when you had, these stake fences like you see in something, out of Game of Thrones. What they're doing is they're trying to say that for many times, because of different factors in life, things have remained out of reach. And what they want to do is they want to take peak performance and turn it into a constant state that can be triggered when needed. And they call that exostasis. And exostasis has four qualities, as they describe it: selflessness, timelessness, effortlessness, and richness. They mention a bunch of various different methods to get to this state, and they talk about how governments and churches, organized religion, have historically tried to keep people away from one of these altered states. The section of the book that makes this claim, that the people have been taken away from these states, describes three prominent barriers to achieving heightened states of mind. And these barriers are among the reasons for the rarity of altered states, even though they're available to everyone. So, organized religion, physical constraints, and the government. Each of them, in some way, holds back the individual from a heightened state, a state of enlightenment, a state of flow where everything comes easy to them and they are able to perform, whether that be in writing, whether that be physically, whether that be spiritually. They're able to perform in some way which is above and beyond what they would usually be able to do. So the heart of this book is pretty much the second part, which talks about how people can achieve these states. And these altered states of consciousness are achieved through psychology, neurobiology, pharmacology, and technology. So the chapter on psychology starts with a dialogue between Oprah, of all people, and one of her guests, basically as a stepping off point, something that will basically give you the idea of the scale at which people are yearning to get outside of themselves and to facilitate a condition of a changed state and to become better people. And Oprah pretty much, embodies that herself in her career. There's a big play on positive psychology in the book, and it's almost held up to be a replacement for religion and spiritualism, which is a really important theme in the book, but is something that kind of oscillates between psychology and religion. And one thing that caught my eye was the references to something they called, or they named, neurotheology. The idea of induced altered states through forced religious experiences. So for example, there's a few different experiences that they catalog. One is like a Mormon leader who is a religious director. He feels this spiritual high from the religious music that he does. And then he leaves and he goes into club music, and he finds that he's inducing the same level of elation in his club music that he is in his religious music, and it kind of causes a crisis of faith for him. Another situation mentioned is the situation of mystics, meditators that use, forms of remembrance and litanies and dhikr matched with head movements to induce heightened states of enlightenment. Things like Sufi mystics and Buddhist monks and things like that. And it brings about this feeling of oneness with the universe and the absolute unity of being. So while mystic experiences are generally thought not to exist, the book catalogs a few different attempts not only to recreate them, but to measure both how and when they occur. Why is this of interest? Well, to me personally, this kind of stood out from the book, because if we're saying that these types of religious experiences are special and they're gifted from God, what scholars of Suluk would call ahwal, as many of these states amongst Muslim mystics are described, then what does the ability to measure and recreate them say about the validity of these states? How religious are they really? Can we really say that they're gifts from God, not brought about by someone's own will? What does this say about the whole topic of karamat, the miracles of the saints? It's important to remember that a core belief of Ahl Sunnah is that karamat are not self-induced. They are gifts from God. And that means that spiritual exercises with the intention to bring about these states is errant, theologically and legally. And it would seem to be, support the errancy of these, spiritual exercises would seem to be supported by these studies, meaning if someone is training you how to become spiritual, then in reality they're BSing you. Spirituality, if you want to call it that, closeness to God, and gaining His pleasure is only achieved through following the Quran and the example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The neurobiology and technology sections of the book focus on the use of substances and devices for inducing these altered states. They talk a lot about sensory deprivation tanks, the Gaines field effect, so on and so forth. There's an almost nauseating focus on Burning Man and extreme sports as ways that people bring about altered states and peak performance and kind of get into the zone. So is ecstasis something wrong? Well, if to reach it you're losing your mind, you're slamming yourself into the side of a mountain, or you're fooling yourself or being fooled into some false piety, then yes. However, if you're gaining greater understanding about yourself, your body and its limits, and where it can be, and remaining balanced and ethical while doing it, then great, exercise away. So is this a great book? Is it one of the best books I've ever read? No. Is it an interesting book? Yes. What it is not is not an instruction manual, but it's an interesting window into the world of human performance and peak performance. I would recommend it as something that, if you can check it out from the library, check it out. If you can get it on audiobook and listen to it during a commute, it's certainly entertaining. And so that is Stealing Fire. Please subscribe to the channel, hit notifications, share it if you liked it, and we'll see you with the next review.